The Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industry reinforced biosecurity guidelines for livestock shows across the state. News 4's Jacqueline Lambert joins us live in studio to talk about this. So Jacqueline, what prompted this reminder about guidelines?
Kinsley, it is in response to a flu outbreak among dairy cattle in 12 states. The outbreak has not reached Alabama. However, it is a good opportunity to remind farmers about safety for livestock shows ahead of events such as the Peanut Festival. The president of the Pike County Cattlemen's Association noted the popularity of participating in these shows across the state. However, the association's priority is the safety of these animals.
It's very important. The cattle at these shows are very expensive. There's been a lot of money put into these. You just look out for sickness, and I mean, you don't share like water buckets or feed pans or any grooming equipment with any other people that's not within your herd. Animals showing signs of illness, they're not allowed on the grounds or show or can't be stalled around any of the other animals.
Those guidelines outline things you should do before, during, and after livestock shows to prevent the spread of disease. Kinsley?
Jacqueline Lambert, thank you. The state veterinarian is urging owners to follow these guidelines closely. Those guidelines include not allowing nose-to-nose contact between animals, monitoring them for illness, and cleaning equipment before and after shows.